Welcome everyone, thank you for tuning in. You are listening to The Account. Before we start, I want to mention that tomorrow I probably will not be able to prepare a daily report as I am traveling almost all day for the upcoming holidays. Today's news report comes on a sad anniversary. It is day 300 of the war in Ukraine. The news were dominated by President Zelenskyy's visit to Bakhmut today. Naturally, we will have to take a look at those reports. Other news to point out today were the results of Putin's visit to Belarus and the aftermath of Russia's drone attack on Ukraine. We will go over the rest of the news quickly while taking a look at the situation inside Ukraine, the occupied territories, and the international developments. But as usual, we will begin with the flashpoints along the front. Kreminna. Allegedly, Russian forces retreated from the remaining northern part of Shebekinsky forest towards the city. This video shared on social media shows Ukrainian soldiers confirmed 5 kilometers from the city. Considering they are casually walking around, they seem to not be close to the combat lines. It was further reported Ukrainian positions inside Chervodopopivka and Dibrova were shelled by Russians. Some pro-Ukrainian sources have started suggesting the battle for Kreminna is imminent. Bakhmut. Not much has happened here today except for President Zelenskyy's visit. However, some battles were reported around Pithorodne and Opytne. And now for the reports on President Zelenskyy's visit to Bakhmut. In a surprise move, Ukrainian President Zelenskyy has visited the frontline hero city of Bakhmut and handed out awards to the defenders. He also inspected advanced positions of one of the mechanized brigades whose soldiers are repelling the enemy on the approaches to the city. He further listened to reports about the situation and proposals on further action. According to President Zelenskyy, Bakhmut remains the hottest point along the front, and he mentioned the fact that wherever Russia takes its flag, it leaves burnt earth and destroyed life. Pain, ruins, and graves. This is the so-called Russian world, and this is what Ukrainian heroes stop. The defenders of Bakhmut presented President Zelenskyy with a Ukrainian flag signed by all of them, which they would like to be handed over to the US Congress. Yevgeny Prigozhin, the founder of Wagner, in a media stunt allegedly flew to the Bakhmut frontline to fire a shot from a self-propelled gun as an invite to Zelenskyy for a meeting. Moving on to the aftermath of the drone attack. The situation regarding the power supply remains critical. According to Ukrenergo, about 80% of Kyiv Oblast is still without electricity. Kyiv Oblast Governor Oleksiy Kuleba said that it would take at least 2 to 3 days more until power might be restored. Denis Shmyhal, the Prime Minister of Ukraine, warned of further attacks on Ukraine over the next week. He said, "Russian terrorists will do everything to leave Ukrainians without electricity by the new year. It is important for them that Christmas and New Year in Ukraine pass in darkness. Therefore, we must prepare for new attacks." And finally, the result of Putin's visit to Belarus. As a result of their meeting, President Putin and President Lukashenko agreed on joint security for the two countries. Lukashenko also thanked Putin for the S-400 and Iskander systems Russia provided to Belarus, which were put on combat duty already. Other talking points included the joint production of military equipment and Russia training Belarusian pilots in a special combat unit. The Institute for the Study of War writes in its daily assessment, Lukashenko probably rejected Putin's attempts to force Belarus to make further concessions regarding integration with Russia. It seems that during the meeting, Vladimir Putin also agreed with the arguments of Lukashenko regarding a Belarusian participation in the war. The assessment states that Belarus's involvement in Putin's war against Ukraine is unlikely. And now for the latest out of Ukraine. Ukraine has reached a deal with SpaceX to receive more than 10,000 Starlink antennas to help counter Russian air attacks. Mikhailo Fedorov, Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Digital Transformation, said this in an interview with Bloomberg. The devices, which provide internet service beamed down from satellites, will be sent to Ukraine in the coming month. Valeriy Zaluzhnyi, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, has publicly appealed to President Zelenskyy to sign a law on strengthening criminal responsibility of military personnel. According to him, this is about toughening liability for absence without leave, desertion, escaping a battlefield or snubbing orders, including to take up arms and fight. Moving on to the developments in the occupied territories. As it turns out, Shoigu's visit to the front lines was quite a distance away. According to open source intelligence, the trenches in the video were geolocated to the village of Armyansk in Russian-occupied Crimea, about 80 kilometers behind the front. A Russian soldier who tried to escape from the Russian army 5 times was detained by Ukrainian forces. According to him, soldiers in his unit were scared of Ukrainian forces and refused to fight. He tried to run away 5 times, but was caught each time and sent back to the front. According to Natalia Humenyuk, head of the Joint Press Center of the Operational Command South, Russian occupiers are repeating the Kherson scenario in Melitopol. In Kherson, the Russian forces also seemed to be preparing for street fights, but ended up looting everything and running away. And now for a rather long but interesting article in Russian. It is titled, Friendly Fire, How the Russian Military Kill Each Other. During the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Russian soldiers died not only in battles, but also suffered non-combat losses, including friendly fire, although the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation hides that statistic. The investigation claims that the carelessness of the command and the low quality of military training are exhausting the Russian troops even before they are sent to the front. One of the most common reasons for the death of soldiers is the careless handling of weapons. In the verdicts of garrison military courts studied by the media, the same story is repeated. A soldier forgot to put on the safety and accidentally or as a joke shot a comrade. Furthermore, drunkenness in the army, negligence of commanders, inability to use military equipment, and domestic conflicts often lead to the death of soldiers. I highly recommend reading the article. And finally, the international developments. Russia has started to move military equipment in Belarus towards the Ukrainian border. Reportedly, tanks, trucks, and personnel of the armed forces of Russia were being transported from the northern and central parts of Belarus closer to the border with Ukraine. Despite statements about the end of the mobilization inside Russia, President Putin has ordered the formation of a working group on mobilization and training of recruits. He also demanded a monthly update on the issue. According to Yuri Inat, the spokesman for the Air Force Command, Russia is using 40 airfields to carry out attacks on Ukraine, with 5 to 6 being located inside Belarus. Since the full-scale invasion, 1 or several long-range radar detection A-50s have been deployed over Belarus, tracking all air targets on the territory of Ukraine. Putin has awarded Denis Pushilin and Leonid Pasishnik. Explosions in Belgorod Oblast, Russia, left parts of the city of Shebekinsky without electricity. A huge explosion and fire was reported at the Urengoy Center 2 main gas pipeline in Russia. According to Russian news, 3 people died. And now for today's intelligence updates, starting with the UK Ministry of Defense. On December 16th, Russian President Vladimir Putin visited the joint headquarters of the Special Military Operation. Putin was filmed meeting with a number of senior military officers, including Chief of General Staff Valeriy and Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu. He invited proposals for next steps of the special military operation. Commander of the Russian group of forces in Ukraine, General Sergei Surovikin, was one of those who presented a report. In this choreographed meeting, Putin likely intended to demonstrate collective responsibility for the special military operation. This display likely aimed to deflect Putin's responsibility for military failure, high fatality rates, and increasing public dissatisfaction from mobilization. The televised footage was probably designed to also dispel social media rumors of General Gerasimov's dismissal. And finally, the evening report by the General Staff of Ukraine. The Russian occupiers continue to conduct full-scale armed aggression against our state. They do not stop striking critical infrastructure and civilian homes on the territory of Ukraine, violating the norms of international humanitarian law, the laws and customs of warfare. The volume of transfers of mobilized personnel, weapons and military equipment, fuel and lubricants and ammunition from the far eastern regions of the Russian Federation is increasing. The enemy is concentrating its efforts on conducting offensive actions in the Bakhmut and Avdiivka directions. He is trying to improve the tactical position in the Kupiansk and Liman directions. In other directions, the enemy defends previously occupied lines, concentrates efforts on restraining the actions of units of the defense forces of Ukraine, and at the same time continues to shell the positions of our troops and civilian objects along the contact line. The enemy continues to suffer losses. On December 18th, it was confirmed that units of the defense forces of Ukraine fired at areas where the enemy's manpower and equipment were concentrated in the temporarily occupied territory of the Zaporizhzhia region. In particular, in the areas of the settlements of Polohi, Vasilivka, and Kamianka-Dniprovska. The losses of the enemy are more than 130 wounded occupiers, up to 10 units of weapons and military equipment of various types were destroyed. Information about the dead invaders is being clarified. The enemy continues to use the network of civilian healthcare facilities in the temporarily occupied territory to treat wounded Russian occupiers and mercenaries of private military campaigns. According to the available information, in Luhansk, the city's multidisciplinary hospital is equipped as a military hospital of the Russian occupying forces, which is already overloaded with wounded occupiers. And that wraps up our report for day 300 of the war. In case one of the articles mentioned caught your interest, I included links to all of them in the description. Thank you for tuning in to today's report and have a great day. You were listening to The Account. Slava Ukraini.